Welcome to the Visibility Brief, a Yext series where we sit down with business leaders to explore how AI is transforming brand discovery. I'm Rebecca Colwell, SVP of Marketing at Yext, and I am joined today by Christian Ward, our Chief Data Officer, for an illuminating conversation about how AI is fundamentally changing consumer search behaviors and brand visibility. Hi, Christian.
Hello.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, we have so much to talk about today.
Yes.
So excited to geek out with you. So I would love to start first with the consumer experience, because I think the way people have started searching for information has become really different. So can you just walk us through at a high level the difference between how people are using Google to find information and how they're using AI search platforms?
Well, so right now there's a big shift in the consumer behavior, but it's still early. So what I would say is typically when people are thinking about simple things like what time does a store open or do you have this product, they still are in that Google search frame of mind. So they're still entering very basic things. But what's starting to happen is we're moving towards dialogue. So one of the best ways to think about it is search classically comes from the Latin circo, circare, and it means to encircle. And what it means is I'm kind of giving you like a broad circle of the answers in here somewhere. Dialogue, on the other hand, is Greek, dialogos, means through words. And what it's saying is people are starting to understand that AI allows them through words to get a lot closer to what they're looking for. And so it changes the entire study of what consumer behavior is. There's been studies on how people are engaging and not with these different tools. But ideally, what we're seeing is the more complex something is, people are going to the AI. And so the simple stuff like directions, that's still very much, in fact, we've seen a rise in Google Maps visibility because I think people are sort of having conversations in the AI. But when you need directions, you still go to Google and Maps and hook it up to your car and go. So it's very interesting right now to see how the bifurcation in when they use, classic search, let's call it, and AI. And it's also interesting in that there's an AI mode button, as you know, in Google.
Right.
And it's kind of funny because, in a way, it's sort of like the QWERTY keyboard. It, Google is purposely slowing us down from just jumping right into AI. I think that button's going to go away really soon. It's just all going to be one experience. But the models are getting smart enough to understand what's simple and what can I answer instantly, and what takes more time and maybe more thought, both by the model and the human.
Interesting. I mean, I'm obsessed. I'm in every day asking so many complex questions. I'm a very curious person, so I'm just like learning and learning and learning. I'm very curious how AI knows how to answer my questions. Like, what information is it going out and referencing to come back and answer a question that I might have?
So there's really three ways that happens. So if you ask AI a question, it can answer from its classic training data. So that's sort of to a cutoff date where they train the model. So if you ask something like, why is the sky blue? The AI, the training has enough data on that to answer you in a very thoughtful way. But if you ask, what time does this, the old Homestead restaurant across the street, what time do they open today? That a lot of times what it does is it looks in training, but it also kicks off a web search. So we call that grounding the model, where it goes and it checks for factual information or objective knowledge, we might call it, that is subject to change. And so you'll see this in the responses a lot of times. The AI will come back and say, well, I tried looking for it. I didn't see anything new. And that store usually opens at 7. So that's where it's sort of going and saying it got some data from training, which is really the internet, reviews, listing, all those platforms, your websites, that's all been trained. But for things that might change or change often, it grounds itself and it tries to give more factual information. There is a third way that it can analyze, and that's more of that deep research you've seen. So
Mhm.
sometimes if you ask it, like, I really want you to go, we'll look into this, it will do a whole nother process, which is not just grounding for simple facts, but looking for really detailed sources of information and citing them back to you. So fundamentally, if we're talking about how, when I'm talking to the AI, it's responding, it's pretty much one of those three ways.
Interesting. So I know we have some research coming out soon from
Mhm.
Yext Research that I got an early peek at. Thank you for
Mm.
sharing. That was great. And I was fascinated to see that it cites different sources depending on the type of question that's asked as well. Is that right?
Yeah, this is, I think this is a pretty exciting area because for us, there's a lot of platforms out there now that are saying, here's what the citations are. If we're talking about AI being adopted, the most important thing is trust. If you don't trust the AI, you're not going to use it. It's also really easy to switch from one AI to another, right? So if an AI gets data wrong and the consumer realizes it, they're just going to jump to the next model. They're not going to stay because there's no cognitive burden of going from one to the other. You're just talking. So it's very easy to switch. So the trust is really important. If trust is the most important thing, citations are the receipts. They're the process by which the AI says to you, here is the fact or where I got the information. What we have looked at is rather than sort of looking at from the brand lens, we've been very careful to build our entire platform around looking at it from the consumer lens. So what we're saying is a consumer is always in a place. And they're pretty much going to ask questions wise things that either have to do with their place or place influences the response. So instead of us just saying brand name and asking a model what it knows about the brand and seeing the citations, that's why you see a lot of like Reddit and Wikipedia. But that's not how any consumer searches. I'm in New York City looking for coffee. If you ask your AI, do you use location for every question? It actually says yes. The AI will tell you, I will lose your, unless you turn it off, your AI always starts with your location. And so we wanted to test if it's a location-based question, which all consumers are in a location, and then we broke it down even further, which is there is the ability when you think about questions, people either ask branded questions or unbranded questions. Now, the SEO community has known that for years, but in AI land, it segments the citations instantaneously. It will cite back very different responses if you say something branded. So if I say, again, the old homestead or any business, if I say the brand, it's looking for different source material. If I don't say a brand, it actually looks at a wider net and brings back brands. So it's sort of counterintuitive. It brings back more websites and more sources. But then inside of each of those, we also segment one step further, which is, did I ask you an objective question, like a factual question, or a subjective question, that one with an opinion, let's say? So a branded objective question cites different sources. A branded subjective question is different. And then unbranded objective, unbranded subjective, they're all different citations. And there is overlap, but what we're finding is not only is it different, the strategy every brand has to have to be the source for each of those answers has to be different. And we're seeing massive differences across industries, what's cited, what's not. So that's a long answer to a really important question because for almost every brand, you're only going to be visible if you can figure out the best path for each type of question, because there will be some questions you just can't answer. They're not going to let you. So it's a lot for us to analyze, but that study is coming out soon. I think we analyzed 6 million citations over 60 days. So we could really see what's coming back and what's being used.
It's interesting. Was there anything that really surprised you in the data?
Yes, there's a few. So probably the biggest one is that there is a very big difference between if you're using the APIs for AI to check citations, because they actually have a citation API, many of the providers, which is phenomenal. And then if you use the application that a consumer uses, you'll see citation differences. You'll also see citation differences, like I was saying before, most people that are analyzing this today, they're doing what's called a query fan out. And that is where, again, I take your brand, we could say Yext, and I say to an AI model, take Yext, and what are all the questions someone might ask about Yext? And you'll get this query fan out that says 20 questions. Then you put all those 20 questions back in the AI and you see the citations. The problem with that is a lot of these studies show, oh, it's all Reddit, like Reddit's the most, or it's all Wikipedia. I don't know if any of you have tried this, but if you actually go in and try this, you don't get that a lot of times. What you get is the local website or the local business, or we see like one of the most surprising things I saw was MapQuest. When was the last time any of you used MapQuest, right? Like, and no offense, I love them, but like MapQuest Yellow Pages, these older directories have a massive proportion of the citations. And so this is one of those areas where how you ask the question, from our lens, it's from the consumer location perspective versus this brand out strategy. I'm not saying Reddit and Wikipedia those are important, but you have almost no control there. There's a huge portion of these from the consumer AI use case where you have a lot of control. So
If you and I were to sit down right now and each open our version of our favorite LLM and ask the exact same question.
yes,
Okay, so we're in the same area, we're querying the same industry, and we're asking the same, let's say, like a branded objective question.
Yep.
Are we going to get the same answer?
So you will get very similar answers. You may not get the exact same citations, but it also depends on how much you use your LLM or your agent because of memory. And so if it remembers that, let's say, I really enjoy steak and you're vegan, it's actually going to be drastically different. And this is an area that I don't think people have really dove into
Mm-hmm.
enough, which is rankings are becoming so personalized. Every piece of my memory is going to change what it says. The reason why Google never applied memory, because, for example, like I have a daughter with a tree nut allergy, and she's 19 now. That means for 18 years, I've typed into Google tree nut friendly allergy menu when we would go to dinner, right? Which is kind of hilarious because they've had it for 18 years. They couldn't remember that.
Yeah.
The reason they don't do that is every time a memory is created, you shrink the available ads you could show. So if it remembers you're vegan, it can't show you a steak restaurant. So they never went into memory. The LLMs and Gemini now, Google is doing this now. They sort of had to, adjust the model. But memory changes this. So if you ask a question, I ask a question, not only is there volatility based on memory, there's also volatility in how you phrase things. So even just subtle things. There was a report today, someone did a study of just capitalizing letters differently and repeating the same questions. They didn't always get the same responses. So now again, the LLM might have a good reason for that, right? If something that could be a noun, right, like Mustang with a little m, isn't the same as Mustang with a big M. And so there's reasoning behind this, but it does show that there's a lot of volatility. It's also because it's math-based. It's probabilistic. It's not rules-based. Google's almost all rules-based. There's a lot of math, but it's a lot of rules, right? And so that's why you might see more commonly that we would get more similar things in classic search than in an LLM. But I also will tell you that's going to keep getting better and better and better where there's a little more stability to it.
Is there an equivalent of incognito mode for search where I could go in and as I lead our marketing team, could I go in and ask a question about how Yext shows up and get a definitive answer?
So there's two kind of things going on with that sort of idea. You can open a clean session, but if you want, in some of the systems, you can turn off memory and you can turn off any memory. So it's what you might call in ChatGPT a temporary chat. You can turn that on. I would caution everyone, you have to check with your guidelines for your company and how you're using this. But in terms of trying to get a sense of, does it know in the incognito mode, you're going to see more and more people or more controls over what's remembered and what's not. That's a little different than me trying to just see what any random user would get. It's not really designed that way. You could do it by essentially creating a totally new login, a totally new session, a totally new everything. If you really want to do that, I actually recommend using the API suite because the API suite kind of assumes a new session and it's not bringing a memory of an individual to that application. So it's a really good question because if people want to check, it's like when we talk to clients and they go and we say, look, we're running Scout and you're not ranking very well in this location. And they're sitting in the location. They're like, I just checked. I'm doing great. I'm number one. That's because you're sitting in where it's searching. So there's elements here where there's the learning curve of what constitutes a proper valid check of the response from the LLM, just like you would do a search.
Interesting. So that's a very different motion for marketers. We're for 15, 20 years have had a very nicely reliable way of reporting on our visibility on, let's say, Google.
Yep.
How should I be thinking about it in this new era of search?
Well, the most important thing is to start tracking it.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is the advancement in these models, even from GPT-4, 4.5 to 5, and now with Claude Opus 4.1, we're seeing very large jumps in not only their capability, their accuracy, incredible declines in hallucination rates. As that all happens, what I would say is it's almost like we're not even there to be able to say, this is your normal KPI, you're going to be fine. There's the other side of it, which is I think marketers are going to have to get comfortable with a pretty uncomfortable time period here where we don't know that any of these companies are really going to want to share metrics until they have some sort of paid spend or paid model where I believe Perplexity is one of the ones testing this. What would they ever gain by sharing my personal conversations with the AI other than a knock on the door from regulators? So they don't want to share with the marketers quite yet because they have a paid model for access, not ads. Now, we'll see. That will change. And as it changes, we'll see if they share. But in many ways, everything we tried to build as marketers that were based on surveillance, so cookies, cookie pools, UTM encoding, tracking, Google sharing that data across the web, all of that stuff starts to kind of get really opaque here. And so I think the best thing marketers can do is to use the LLMs, ask questions, track it, do your own queries. You can work with a company like ours where we are doing that at scale across every location in the world now. But at the same time, it's so important to use these and ask it questions as a consumer. And you will almost instantly, one of the beauties of LLMs is if you ask and act like a consumer and you ask it questions, you can actually ask the LLM. So it's sort of like put on your consumer hat. You go and you say, "Hey, can you tell me about this surf brand? I want to learn if this is a good surfboard." And it will basically, and then you can then put on your corporate hat for the surfing company and say, "Can you tell me where you got all that data?" And it will actually tell you. Like imagine being able to call Google and go, "Hey, why aren't we ranking higher?" That you don't have to do that. You can actually ask the LLM, and it gives you now. Again, there's some variability, but it will give you a lot of great information to exactly how it got that answer.
It's really interesting.
Yeah,
I love
it's a
that.
very new world. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna put my consumer hat on and my marketing hat
Yes.
on. It's a great trick.
I do it. I do it for every client meeting. We will do that both programmatically at scale, so hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data points. But then I also screen grab the same exact thing as a consumer so they can actually see it. And it really helps show how citations work, how the models find data, and what you can do about it.
Right, right. So earlier you alluded to the need to measure your visibility.
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit more about that location level? Because you talked about it being really location dependent. How should I be thinking about that from a measurement perspective?
So when we talk about location, there's two things. So many of our clients obviously have business locations. They have like physical stores or physical businesses or service area businesses. That's one aspect of location. The other aspect is your brand anywhere. So for example, if I'm an airline and I'm based in the Southeast, what do they think about me or what's my competition in London? How do they talk about me? So you can actually see this world where brand is a global concept. And so using location, we're almost saying there's your physical location, and there you should look at all of the competition right around there. So if let's say a coffee shop in Roswell, Georgia, there's not that many coffee shops in Roswell, Georgia. I used to live there. So there's not that many. And so your competition's a little light. You're probably doing okay visibility wise. What you need to be focusing on is different than a coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan where there's 287 in 4 blocks. So you have this situation where you want to look at it from the customer perspective and your physical locations or service areas or even markets you're interested in being in. But the ideal scenario is that you can almost project what locations matter and then look at the consumer use of location. A great example of this actually is we have some clients internationally that are hospitality. When I'm going on vacation to Scotland and I'm looking for a hotel, I'm not asking that question near your hotel. I'm back in Florida asking that question.
Right.
So they're projecting the location of where they want to see, how they're showing up, what they're doing. And that's a phenomenal way to do this. Well, you really just need the systems and the place to be able to store what you're analyzing. But that's been a huge unlock for Yext.
Amazing. By the way, that is one of the top use cases that I have adopted for
Yes,
ChatGPT.
yeah.
It's like vacation planning.
Absolutely. It's amazing.
Yes, especially it's learned about me now, so it knows the things I like. It does the walking tours.
Yes.
It connects back. It's incredible. You kind of snuck it in there, but you talked about in your coffee shop example, competition.
Yes.
I would think as a marketer, the most important thing when I look at my metrics is to also understand how that is relative to everyone else in the universe. So does that play out in the worlds of AI visibility as well?
Yes. So when we're looking at all of these things, we're looking at classic search and AI search. We keep the metrics separate, but we actually pool them. And the reason why is there's different levels. So you have classic Google, then you have ChatGPT, OpenAI, or rather Claude. You have all these different models. That fragmentation, it means that if those models are different, or if the rules are different, or if the interpretation of the citation is different, you're going to see differences in not only you, but also your competition. And so one of the best ways to optimize for this is to run an analysis, figure out everyone around you that's also competing, and then gather all the data on what does their data look like on MapQuest? What does their data look on their website? What does their data look like in all of these places? And when I say data, there's really four columns of that this is all built on. It's not like there's two webs and AI's over here and like Google's over here. It's all the same content and data structure. Yeah, it's really data on third-party platforms. That's something we call listings, but it's really anytime your data is somewhere else. Google Maps, Google Business Profile, your website, so your owned and operated websites, reviews platforms, and social platforms. There are other places you'd show up, things like Reddit or forums or in the news. Those you don't control, you can't control. You try and look at it through the lens of, I can control these things, but so can my competition. Then you see how far you are from the top competitors on certain factors. We look at about 200 factors per location, 40 competitors deep. So every location, but that's a ton of data. So we sift through it and identify these are the areas where you could do better or worse for this particular location, competitive profile. But I think looking at any of these outcomes and not understanding exactly how you stack up relatively to the competition in that area is probably a mistake.
If you were to give a marketer today top 3 things that you should do to improve your visibility on AI search, what would you recommend?
The first thing, number one, you've got to use the models. I think there's a lot of people saying we're AI first, and I'm pretty sure they're not using it at home because the things they say, I'm like, that's a little off. You got to use them just because familiarity with any sort of new technology really helps you understand in a real world way. So you always want to first start by saying, how am I looking as a brand? Ask it questions in your brand voice and as a consumer about the brand. At Yext, obviously, we do that at scale. We'll do it for every location you have all over the world and even where you're not. So, but you start there because what you're really trying to do is the first thing is you want to track anything you can. You can't improve it if you can't measure it. So you start by doing that. After that, looking at the citations and the sources, it turns out in most cases, what we see is depending on where the competition is and how you're doing, if you want to optimize in Google and you want to optimize in AI, there's a benefit, even if you're trying to get better in Google, there's a benefit of getting better in the LLMs. And it's because when you look at the citations, you realize Google doesn't give us citations, they give us links and ranks. The LLMs give us citations. Well, if you can compare and contrast, you start to get this strategy that says, hey, I need to focus on this area. Often we've seen things where in financial services, also in healthcare, we've seen a really interesting trend in the data, which is, yes, review ratings matter always, but without getting a little too cagey, what we've actually found is the recency of the last review is usually much higher correlated with ranking higher in these systems. And so I don't want to tell the financial services people, hey, you just get a review. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. But kind of that's it, which is you really just need more review, a recent review. And so when you look at it at this granular level, you start to realize there's lots of things you can do. So basically to break it down, it's you've got to track it all as much as you can. Using it as a start, but really tracking it at scale helps. You then look inside that to see the citations, the sources against the competition, and then you start to make updates to your marketing strategy in all of these areas across your listings, your data, your websites, your social and review approach.
Interesting. And, as a marketer, I'd likely start with the thing that I have the most control over, my website, my local pages,
Yes.
and then kind of go from there.
Yes, absolutely. I do think that's an area that marketers perhaps don't think of it in that format, but I think you're going to see a lot of people shifting their mindset to what's fully under my control, what's partially under my control, and what's not under my control. And you start with the websites, but in the citation study, giving everyone a little hint of where that's going, the citation study, it is unbelievable the amount of impact. It's well over 50% if you take your websites and the third-party directories that your data you can mostly control it. So I can take control of my Google Business Profile, but Google's not going to let me put a promotion in the Google Business Profile because they want me to buy an ad. But I can put a promotion on my website. So that's fully in your control. This is partially in your control. Reviews and social it's really, you can influence it. You can have a presence there and you can engage, but you can't control what people do there. And then there's this last category where you just don't control it. Like you're not going to, you can try, but you're not going to really control Wikipedia. It's sort of, or news or forums, it's tougher. But if you look at it that way, By model, we actually know by model now, by region, by industry, we can literally tell you which things that you can control, you can actually attack first.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So speaking of control, that's the topic for our next conversation.
Oh, excellent.
It's a great place to wrap up today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
These were amazing insights, and I have a lot of work to do.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.